And I also wanted to rise to make a contribution to the bill before us today. And before I do go further, I just wanted to firstly acknowledge the work of the former Minister that had responsibility for forestry, Senator Watt, and whose advocacy for forestry must be commended in this place. And also want to acknowledge my good friend Senator Chisholm on his elevation as the Assistant Minister for Forestry as well here in the Senate. I've spoken many times, as senators would be aware in this place, about the significant contribution that is made by our sustainable forestry industry, given the importance that it played in my home state, Victoria, and obviously across the country in other states, and the importance of being able to achieve emissions reduction targets. And I think that's something that always gets forgotten in the debate or the discourse around these issues when they do come up time to time in this place. That forestry, forest management, the timber industry can actually play a positive role in helping governments across the world to actually reduce our emissions. We know that trees absorb carbon, so using timber products stores that carbon, and then these trees are planted to replace the timber that is used for those products. So by definition about what is being discussed here, they are very much sustainable from when they are planted to all the way to the end of when we are then using those products for whatever they might be used for. But it is great to see that the positive role that forestry plays in climate action being recognised and being encouraged on the world stage. And new research does urge nations around the world, and this has been discussed many times at COP. Other world leaders around the world recognise the importance of the industry, that sustainable forestry plays very much a positive role and thereby addressing an emerging global timber and wood supply gap as the world pivots to climate-friendly fibre supplies. And it's no wonder that demand for timber products is increasing. And if we do not support a sustainable industry in forestry, this demand will either be met by unsustainably sourced timber or by other products that do not have the same climate benefits and may even contribute to higher emissions. And that's something, sadly, that does not get acknowledged by some in this place. Now, this is one of the great frustrations that I do have with some senators who fail to understand the need and the positive role that forestry plays. And it is also the case that we have seen time and time again many activists, particularly those in my home state of Victoria, doing everything they can to disrupt the industry, to ruin the lives of many people in regional communities where the sole employment, the sole source of income, the sole lifeblood of many regional towns is timber and the forestry industry. And we have one of the most sustainably managed forest industries in the world. It's something we should be very proud of. We have strict regulations. And yes, there are times where things need to be improved. There are times where we do need to make improvements, such as the bill that is before us today. But we should not also rubbish an industry that supports tens of thousands of jobs, that does have a positive role to play in the environment and helps us get to our targets to reducing emissions by 2050. So the amendments that the bill proposes aims to better protect the Australian market from illegally harvested timber and from timber products and support legal and sustainable trade by improving regulatory tools and action for non-compliance. As we know, illegal logging has devastating consequences on our climate, on the environment, people and the economy, and it is a driving force of various environmental issues around the world. And as a member of the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Committee, as well as being the co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Forestry, Timber and Paper Products with my good friend Senator Duniam, we have seen firsthand the major role that Australia's forest products play in promoting a sustainable forest management. Now, the Albanese Labor government understands the importance of combating illegal logging, and the Department of Agriculture is heavily involved in international efforts to promote sustainable forest management. It's an industry that we must preserve and protect, and this bill will keep Australia's logging laws at the forefront of international efforts to prevent illegal timber harvesting and associated trade. The bill will also enforce a new requirement on importers, and as we heard earlier, I think it's important that the importers play a positive role, a significant role about how we manage and trying to understand where timber is sourced from around the world. Sadly, I know Senator McKim mentioned about the Greens saying it doesn't go far enough, but the only thing that will satisfy the Greens is a complete shutdown of forestry in Australia and a complete shutdown of these jobs and these communities right across regional Australia. But the irony is they want to import timber from countries that don't have the same standards that Australia has. They don't have the same standards that Australia has. And what we have heard from time and time again, from various inquiries and reports from right around the world and here in Australia, is that there are some countries that we do import timber from that those standards, quite frankly, are not up to scratch. They are not up to scratch. And yes, they might have that official stamp that we all believe is certified to be at an acceptable standard, that we would hope, Senator McKim, that would actually be the standards that you and I and others in this place would accept. But unfortunately, we know that there are some countries where timber is sourced. It's not the case. They are not up to the standards that we, as Australians, should be accepting and should be importing into this country, hence why we are introducing this bill. Now, the requirement is also on the processors to give notice prior to importing or processing timber products, giving the government more information about what is entering the market. It will also allow for more flexible enforcement options, including expanded monitoring and investigation powers, strict liability offences, injunctions and enforceable undertakings under the Act. It is also important to note that before the current regulation, which was introduced back in 2012, around 10% of timber imported to Australia each year was estimated to be illegally logged. What a disgrace. This undercut the prices of sustainably grown timber by 7 to 16%. Therefore, the passage of this bill through this place will continue to make our country a less attractive destination for illegally sourced timber. And finally, we start to flesh out the bad guys in the industry who all they want to do is destroy the environment and provide Australians with cheap source of timber in this country. Now, it's important to make sure that Australia retains a reputation on the global scale as a responsible supplier of sustainable and legally sourced timber products. And this week, Acting Deputy President marked the National Forestry Day, where we celebrated the enormous contribution of Australia's forest industries and what it does to our country. And I was able to witness firsthand recently when I had the pleasure of touring a sawmill in my home state of Victoria, Powtow Sawmills. Like so many regional towns in Victoria, the Powtow Sawmills is a major employer in their community, providing lifelong employment to their workforce. In fact, there was one family had 3 generations of employees at the one site, and over 80% of whom live in the immediate area. Australia's forest industries employ around 80,000 people. 80,000 people directly, and another 100,000 indirectly across the supply chain, many in regional communities and many in the manufacturing sector. Our country's forest industry contributes to around $24 billion to our economy every single year. And during my visit to the Powtow sawmill, we also discussed how the timber products supports the sustainable management of our forests, which protects the environment, contributes to emissions reduction and mitigates the risks of bushfires. And I am glad to see that the Victorian government has finally recognised the industry in being able to work in the sustainable management of our fire management with the employment of harvesting crews by Forest Fire Management Victoria. When we have these bushfires that occur, sadly on a much more frequent occurrence, the very first people that go out to fight these bushfires are people in the industry. It's not necessarily the CFA in my home state of Victoria, but it's the people in the industry who have the equipment to go out and break up those those fires before the CFA and other volunteers can actually go in and then start to put the fires out. And we saw the devastating impact that the Black Saturday bushfires had across the eastern states some years ago. So it's important that having these workers in the industry is so important for them to be involved in very much a sustainable forest management practice. They're workers who bring valuable skills and experience and have encountered different scenarios. Forestry also plays a significant role in Australia's efforts to mitigate climate change. Now, we know as trees grow, they absorb the carbon, as I mentioned earlier, which then continues to be stored in wood, in soil, retaining carbon that would otherwise live in the atmosphere. That's just pure fact, Senator McKim. The Australian forest products sector is world leader in sustainable forest management. But the value of our excellent environmental protection is greatly diminished if Australian timber is replaced by supply that is illegally logged, devastating the environment overseas. By protecting our industry from illegal logging and rewarding leadership in sustainability, this is exactly the outcome that this bill is preventing. The Australian Forest Products Association, the peak body that represents the many fine men and women in the industry in forest, wood and paper products, has thrown its support behind these strengthened reforms. Now, as a result of the native forestry industry closures in Victoria and WA, sadly in our home state, Senator McKenzie, I know you and I have been one on this, but the industry has seen an increase in the volume of imported hardwoods. Now, that is telling that there is strong demand out there in the community for these products, and we should do everything we can to support our domestic industry in a sustainable way that also meets our strict regulations. It is unacceptable that by shutting down our world-leading sustainable industries that we are importing products from places with less stringent environmental regulations than Australia.
Senator McKenzie.
According to AFPA, Australia's import of timber and timber products has increased from $4 billion to $6.87 billion over the decade to 2022-23. Now, Acting Deputy President, illegal timber has severe impacts on our environment, and it has enormous ramifications on our domestic biosecurity protections. It creates an increased risk for pests and diseases, and this could have dire consequences for the local industry. And while it is disappointing to see the Victorian government shut down the native timber industry, it is pleasing to see that the federal government is putting money into plantations and supporting forests and timber workers. And I do know that is something that both sides of the aisle here in Canberra are very proud to do. This week, the Albanese Labor government also announced funding worth $5.6 million for 8 new plantation projects through the Support Plantation Establishment program. The projects will create softwood plantation ranging from 40 to 1,671 hectares in size, located in Victoria, New South Wales, Western Australia and Tasmania. The government has also invested $10 million to deliver the forestry workforce training program through Forestworks over the next 2 years. This program will improve access to required qualifications and credentials for the forest and wood product sector. Now, Acting Deputy President, with the time that I have left, without a strong timber industry, we wouldn't be able to utilise the things that Australians love, such as house frames, cardboard boxes and paper products, just to name a few. So let's not forget that timber is the ultimate renewable, and demand for timber is only increasing.
Senator Chacon, please resume your seat. The time for this debate has expired.